Welcome to Global Money Talk, brought to you by Sampro TV. Greetings to all of our viewers from across the U.S., Korea, and around the world. We are coming to you live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange in New York City, the financial capital of America. I'm your host, Remy Blaire, and joining me this morning is Tai Wong, independent proprietary trader. Tai, happy Friday to you.
Oh, good morning, and it's been a long week, so kind of glad that Friday's here. It gives us a little weekend to rest up.
It does feel like it's been a long week given all of the market action and, of course, the central bank rate decision out from the Fed. There was so much anticipation going into it, and after the rate announcement and the statement by Fed Chair Jay Powell and the rally yesterday, here we are on Friday, and it's a witching day, isn't it?
It is, and you feel like you've sort of worked overtime because with Powell in the afternoon, you really have to. The market usually can be quiet in the afternoon until the last hour, but you really felt like you had to watch his words, every single syllable very, very carefully. And sometimes he would say something, and the market would move because there was a delay of a few seconds, 5-10 seconds between when he says it and when you actually see it. So it's amazing that the market's so efficient that it moves ahead of what you hear. And triple witching today, so once every quarter, and this is the quarter, and this could be an important one.
So for viewers out there who might not be familiar with what witching is, it's nothing to do with Halloween, which is coming the end of October. So can you walk us through what this witching event actually is? And when it comes to expectations for volatility as well as volume, what can we really expect today?
So it all depends, and it's actually a good time to go into it because you hear about triple witching, but commentators don't really talk about exactly what it is. So every sort of, I guess, September, December, March, and June, the index options, single stop options, and ETF options all expire on the same day, and they expire at the end of the day. So it's that last hour of trading. It can get very volatile, and that's why they call it the witching hour when things happen. So it became triple witching, and it sounds great. So that name is going to stick, and I think it's going to be good. So the thing to remember about options expirations, and I traded lots of options as a gold trader, as a foreign exchange trader, as a base metals trader, is where is the open interest? What options are still alive that are about to expire? So let's look at the live shot of the S&P 500 if we can. I think we're trading at 5684, right? So the high was just above 5700, and what you have is most option strikes are going to be probably in round numbers. So 5500, 5550, 5700. So I bet you there are a lot of open strikes at 5700. What that means is that these options, and it doesn't actually matter whether they're going to be calls because of where they are, but technically it doesn't matter if it's calls or puts, but they're going to be calls and they're going to go away at 4 o'clock. So what happens if you're a market maker and you've sold these options to funds, to retail people? Yesterday we closed just above 5,700, and that's important because we assume, market makers will assume that the close is above 5,700. So if they've set their books up to assume that they're going to have to pay out on the calls at 5,700. If we drop below that, well, those longs that they bought to pay the owners of the calls, they don't need anymore, so they're going to have to sell them. Now, it's only 5684, and it's relatively early in the day, so the market makers who are short don't want to be selling low and buying high, which is what they'd have to do if it got very choppy. But let's say we got down to 5650, they might have to sell out some of those longs they bought. But let's say we get a late surge up, they're going to have to buy them back, and that's where the volatility comes from. There's some open strikes at 5,700, but there's apparently a lot of the market makers are short the 5,600 strike as well. So if we dive towards 5,600 for whatever reason later today, we can go through 5,600 very rapidly because these market makers who are long all this underlying S&P 500 that they're going to give to the people who hold the options, all of a sudden that they're not going to get exercised. So they don't want to be long, they'll have to sell. That's where the volatility comes from. So now, most of the time on options expiration days, if there isn't other stuff going on, the market's relatively narrow. Because on the flip side of the people who are short, there are people who are long. So let's say, we're long the 5,700 strike in the S&P 500. Well, I can buy at 5,700 until 4 o'clock today. If it goes to 5,720, what am I doing? I'm selling because I can take advantage of that $20. If it goes back down, say 56.80, I'll buy again. Because I can just trade that strike. For that short period of time between now and the end of the day, that strike is my friend. It's my option. I can buy or sell. So you can make a fair amount of money doing that way. And if you were doing 80 and 20 now, as we get closer, you might do 9 and 10. So there are two forces. One force is trying to trade as much as possible, and the other force is trying to avoid trading it. So that's really where witching comes in and options expiration comes in. And hopefully I haven't put our viewers to sleep with this. The other thing I would add is the options that are expiring today, they're 4 to 1 in terms of calls over puts. What this usually says is the market that are long those calls are going to lose those calls. Now those might be calls that are what we call deep in the money. They could be down at 5,000. They could be at 5,800. They could be out of the money. They're all expiring, which means the market is less long now than will be less long now after 4 p.m. than they are now. So eventually, if they're bullish, and Jay Powell has given the market a reason to be bullish, they're going to have to want to replace that length, either with the underlying or with new options. If you buy options, the option market maker who sold it to you will have to buy some underlying to hedge. So it is likely that we will see the market try to replace some of those longs. On the other hand, in the years since I think the mid-1990s, September has been a very tough month for stocks, and only 4 out of 25 years or something has the S&P really rallied in the month after expiration. So remains to be seen. The other thing I would add is NVIDIA, that everybody's watching, it's actually been trading in a relatively tight range. So the options on NVIDIA today, there are a lot of options. They say $2 billion worth of options that are expiring that are struck at 120. We're a little bit below that. $2 billion of options works out to just under 17 million shares of NVIDIA. So if we start to surge in NVIDIA, you're going to see the market makers, if we get above 120, going to have to buy some NVIDIA stock to be able to give to those people who are going to exercise their options. If not, we'll be relatively quiet and stay, in the current range, 116, 118, which I think is likely, but 120 is important for NVIDIA, and because all those options are going away, is, perhaps likely that you'll see NVIDIA rally, all things being equal, next week.
Well, Tai, I think it's very helpful for the viewing audience to understand what this witching event actually is, because we hear about this all week, about how it could add to volatility as well as volume.
It may do or it may not. It really depends.
And of course, walking us through the example of NVIDIA as well, I think it's a single stock that we have all been keeping our eyes on, and especially given the rally yesterday, we've been seeing key levels, not just for NVIDIA, but the equity averages as well. So I think this is a good time to take a look at where the market has opened this morning. So in New York morning trade at the 11 o'clock hour, we're seeing the Dow, NASDAQ, and S&P 500 in the red, and right now we're seeing the Dow Jones Industrial Average off by about 70 points right now. But we have to keep in mind that the Dow and the S&P 500, as you mentioned, Tai, did close higher yesterday following that rally. And so looking at the NASDAQ Composite Index this morning, let's see where it's trading at the 11 o'clock hour. It is also lower as well, down by over 100 points or 0.7%. Meanwhile, the S&P 500 as well, something we will be keeping our eyes on this morning, is off by about 0.5%. So before we move away from what we'll be paying attention to today, can you also tell the viewing audience about the rebalancing and why it matters?
So we've got three new stocks are going into the S&P 500. That's Palantir, Peter Thiel's company, Dell Computer, and Erie. I believe they're an indemnity insurance company. And the ones that are coming out are Etsy, a company called Bio-Rad, and American Airlines. So this has been known for a while, and I believe, and I'm not really an index expert per se, but I think you go into the index at the closing price, and you come out of the index at the closing price. So there's been, over the last few days, there's probably been some sort of quiet buying of the stocks that are going in. Now these are just speculators who are sort of trying to take advantage of what's going to happen, and a little selling of the ones that are going out. But you never know what's going to happen. It really is your benchmark at the end of the day. So I think most of the funds that the vanguards of the world are probably doing this at the close of the day, right at the end. So you might see bigger moves in these in the names that are going in and going out right close to the end, because they can't. They need to track the index very closely, and that's how they do it. They probably have a certain methodology by which they do it. It's probably algo related, and they may try to match off with other customers other people in the market who want to do that. So you'll get some movement in those names.
And of course, it has been a big week for central banks. The Fed wasn't the only bank that was meeting, and we got the Bank of Japan rate announcement overnight, and we've seen that play out as we headed into the New York session in terms of the FX market. So do you think the BOJ gave clear direction, or is it still a wait-and-see mode?
So the BOJ held their rates. They didn't raise their rates as expected, but with inflation now running in 2.8, 2.9% in Japan, they could definitely have the room to raise rates again this year if they want to. The market thinks they will. In the meantime, dollar yen has actually been grinding higher, trading about 144, up a couple of yen today, up 5 yen since the lows earlier this week or late last week. I can't remember which one it was, but the rate differential is still very, very substantial. You're still picking up a lot of carry. You're picking up 450, 475 basis points of carry. So you don't really want to short that for a very long time, because then you're paying for it. So I think there are people who say, all right, well, we look at the CME FedWatch tool. The market is right now pricing in 25 basis points of cuts for the Fed in November, but 50 in December. And I think that's just, they're a little confused, they're not sure. Seems about right, but again, dollar yen remains a carry trade because the gulf is pretty big between those two currencies.
And we will be getting more data points before the next Federal Reserve meeting, and I'm sure the Fed will be paying close attention to not just the inflation figures as well as jobs report, but other signs of how the economy is faring. So speaking of the economy as well as market movers, what names are you watching on this Friday morning?
So, I'm keeping my eye on Boeing. There's an interesting article that says that the displaced workers who got their last paycheck, I think, yesterday, or was it the Thursday before? No, it was the Thursday before because they struck on Friday, so it was the 12th. Because of the gig economy, and they can work for DoorDash, they can work for Uber, they can work for other companies, there's more flexibility now than there was for a strike than when they struck like 14 years ago, whatever it happened to be, or was it 2014? But in any case, they're in for the long haul. The sense is most people are going to be good until Christmas. The union puts in $250 per worker per week to help them along. They do lose their health insurance, so they'll have to figure out how to replace that in some way. So I think Boeing might be in for a long haul, and we talked about yesterday that Kelly Wartburg is in an unenviable position, having the anger of the union to his predecessors. So let's see how he deals with this. I think there's value in Boeing, just not here right now. Intel, off the bottom. I think there's maybe some value there. They've gotten a couple of pieces of good news. But the one thing that I do want to look at, and let's look at graphic 1, is Bitcoin. Bitcoin has had a really, really good run. So that's a downtrend since sort of the middle of the year. Lower highs, lower lows, not usually a good sign. And just as in the rally over the last couple of days, we've seen it just nose above that downtrend. It's not big enough of a nose that I'd say, all right, I want to buy the break right here. I'd say we'd get above 65,000. We might get a run to 70,000 and new historic highs. But I'm watching this closely. If the show's continued strength, this might be worth a buy here. Not a huge, I'm already long Bitcoin, not a huge add, but I think there might be a little value here, at least for it to go sideways if we break through this, significant downtrend.
And Tai, in yesterday's trading session, as we watched the broader market rally, we also saw the crypto majors, Bitcoin as well as ETH rally yesterday by over 5%. And overnight heading into the session, as you indicated in that chart, we saw Bitcoin break above 64,000, and that's quite a move higher given the recent downtrend.
Yes, and I think it's the thinking, it's a little bit of the FOMO, the fear of missing out thinking. People weren't sure how the market would react to the Fed. So far, the market has reacted very well. Let's see where we are at the end of the day, but it looks like we're going to be up significantly on the week in new high territory. Do you want to miss out on, even though September is typically not a good month, do you want to miss out on a big rally towards the end of the year? And if the S&P or some of these are your benchmarks, as a fund, you don't want to miss you cannot or you don't want to miss your benchmark. So I think there may be money that are sitting a little bit on the sidelines coming in. So people are looking for value. Where can I place this? You're seeing this in gold today. In a bull market, you almost buy every dip, and we're 2613, 2615-ish region. Again, grinding higher. Looks like it will continue that way. So I suspect the market likes the Fed where it is right now, and unless the data for employment comes in strong or inflation rears its head, which seems to be unlikely at this stage, I think that this is a market that wants to be bullish and will be happy grinding higher for the next few weeks at least.
And Tai, before we move away from crypto and gold, it's interesting, especially given that we only have 45 days until November 5th, the day of the U.S. presidential election, that once again we're starting to see headlines of both candidates, Harris and Trump, regarding crypto. So earlier this week, Donald Trump had a rally in Long Island, but he also stepped into a burger joint here in Manhattan, New York, and he was the first to make amongst the candidates, that is, to make a purchase for a burger using Bitcoin. And apparently Anthony Scaramucci is helping Harris with her crypto messaging when it comes to her campaign. So it'll be really interesting to see what comes out from both of the sides.
I think I think both campaigns recognize that there's a lot of people, especially young people, interested in crypto, and you don't want to be crypto unfriendly. I think it was certainly staged, but a clever move by Trump, and a burger joint's that's him, right? He's a burger man. I think part of his everyman appeal, even though he's a billionaire, and I don't think somebody buys his burgers for him. But Harris is from California. She understands technology, and certainly wants to keep the Silicon Valley sort of behind her, and doesn't want to become anti-crypto. But certainly the campaigns are heating up. We have the vice presidential debate coming up in a week and a half. That is going to be a humdinger, because I think J.D. Vance is an attacker. Tim Walz is sort of very different than someone that we've ever seen. The guy doesn't own any stocks, doesn't own any bonds, doesn't own any investments. All he's got is his pension and a savings account. That is so unusual, and makes us, in the finance community, say, do you really understand what happens and how important this is to the economy? So that's going to be a very interesting debate. Yeah,
I'm glad you highlighted that, Tai, because I'm sure you and I were going to be watching and paying close attention to that, and we will be bringing you the coverage after the debate, and we'll see what happens at that event.
Yes.
Well, ahead of the weekend, Tai, I know that you're also keeping an eye on other stories that are making headlines. We know there's a lot when we're talking about names that are listed on the exchanges, but also in terms of geopolitics as well. So there's a lot of ground to cover. So what are the main stories that you're focusing on right now?
So one thing that I certainly noticed is the Israelis have struck Beirut and gone after Hezbollah. that situation looks like it's going to escalate. How much is unclear, but it looks like it's going to get hotter before it really cools down. Looks like they realize that Hezbollah is a much more important threat than Hamas, even though after the terrible attack, that Hezbollah is much more powerful and has the backing of Iran. So they're turning their focus, I think, to Hezbollah right now, and it looks like, and I think the Journal had a article on this saying that the Biden staffers are saying we're not going to get a peace deal. Part of it is the Hamas has not, and again on anonymous comments that Hamas is saying they don't want to respond to certain things that the Americans and the Israelis have proven. Be that as it may, that's the biggest focus. One thing that did catch my attention is 3 Mile Island. Yes. The nuclear plant that that infamously melted down, I think in 1979 or something, is actually getting restarted, and all its power output has been bought by Microsoft, and it's going to power their AI. Now we're in 2024; they're thinking 2028 now, but for that to be ready, and they would also need to be able to hook up to the grid, and that's one of the biggest issues. You can have a lot of new power, but the grid is old, and the grid is really, really hard to change. So, but nevertheless, I think it's really encouraging, because if you're for low carbon, nuclear is the way. And in the U.S. and many parts of the world, there is a mindset against nuclear. Certainly after Fukushima, Japan shut down all its nuclear plants. And now I realize that for the Japanese, it's a special case, right? There's something in the national psyche about nuclear plants and accidents. I get that. But then Germany, Angela Merkel, inexplicably shut down all the German plants, only to have a little problem that didn't age well 2 years later when they found, we're totally dependent on Russian natural gas. So hopefully this is a revival of nuclear power. Won't be easy in the U.S., but the idea that this is clean and it's pretty safe, we can use all the power that we can get. Related to that, as I saw yesterday, the EU car industry had reported EV car sales dropping 41% year on year. Now, there's base effects, because last August was a great year. Yeah. It was a great month for them, but that's a huge drop, 41% year over year. And then new car registrations have dropped 20% as well. What is this, and mostly in France and Germany? What is this going to mean? There's going to be more protectionism against China, against Chinese vehicles coming out of Europe, and you're already seeing that in the United States. So that is going to be the China, sort of economic conundrum is probably going to get worse before it gets better, because they're really, really big in the EVs. The rest of the world wants to do EVs, but they don't want to get priced out by China.
Well, I think those stories that you're paying attention really speaks to the zeitgeist, especially given that AI names have driven a lot of the rally this year. But the reality is, right, AI demands data and it demands energy. And to get that energy needed and to find a sustainable green solution, it's not so easy.
Right. Right, and the last thing on China, this was an interest. China's been struggling trying to revive their economy, but they've made so many changes. They made it much more of a command economy than it was a free market economy, and it hurts the animal spirits. People don't know what to do. If the government picks winners and losers, it really hurts it hurts initiative. And one thing that they talked about is they're thinking about allowing people without the hukou or the internal passport to buy property in major cities like Peking and Shanghai, which is a big, big change. And they're also looking at buying second homes easier. Now, I think it's an interesting signal that they're trying to relax that. They're scrabbling for ways to revive that economy. But until they probably make it less of a command economy and allow the economy to grow organically, these moves may not be enough, but it is interesting that they're starting to say, what, maybe we need to help the real estate people a little bit.
And we know that real estate is something that we'll also be keeping our eyes on, not just in the second largest economy, but also here in the U.S. as well. So thank you so much, Tai. We will continue our conversation in the next segment, Global Money Talk. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Global Money Talk, brought to you by SAMPRO TV. The U.S. presidential election will have wide-ranging impacts across the financial markets and, of course, in terms of international relations. Joining me for this segment, we have Tai Wong. And Tai, at a time when the geopolitical landscape is shifting, there's also uncertainty about future implications of the election outcome on trade, economics, as well as diplomacy. And with 45 days to go until the election day here in the U.S., we are joined by Jeonghun, who is the professor at Korea National Diplomatic Academy. So good evening. Thank you for joining us all the way from Korea today. So before we go into what might happen under the new presidency in the U.S., let's talk about the U.S.-Korea relations now from Korea's standpoint. So give us an overview of where things stand right now.
Okay, good morning, New York, and good night in Seoul. And basically, I think the South Korea-U.S. relations couldn't be better nowadays. As you know, the Biden government's foreign policy is aiming to restore U.S. global leadership, and to this end, it has placed the democratic values at the center of the foreign policy and revitalized the diplomacy by enhancing cooperation with allies and partners in the world. And the Biden government has focused on tracking the rise of China and maintaining its leadership in its East Asian policy and tried to implement its policies on the Korean Peninsula within the strategic framework of the regional policy. And as it focused on the strategic competition with China through cooperation with regional allies and partners, its cooperation with South Korea, a key ally in the region, has been strengthened across a range of areas like diplomacy and security, economy, trade, technology, energy, and culture. So I think most experts in South Korea could agree that South Korea has got a pretty good relationship with the U.S. under the current Biden government.
Professor, just as a follow-up, and just for the American watchers here, in South Korea, what signals do the people, the government watch from the United States to signal whether relations are getting better or is not as good as they could be? What signals does America send that actually Korea sees or pays attention to?
Well, basically, the South Korea think that regardless of the outcome of the presidential election in November, most of the Korean people think that the ARC-US alliance would be durable, and the cooperation between the two countries would be good and under the next U.S. government. So, of course, the South Korean governments and experts in South Korea tried to analyze the impact of the upcoming presidential election in November, but they believe that the overall relationship between the two countries will be all right, regardless of the outcome of the upcoming presidential election in November. So, of course, there could be a little bit differences in terms of who would win the November election, because for example, President Trump has got the traditional approach in terms of dealing with its allies and partners, and Trump also got the America First trade policy that could affect the South Korea's trade with the United States, because the South Korea is one of the countries who got the surplus in terms of trade relations with the United States. So the South Korea is trying to analyze the impact of the outcome of the presidential election, and they are trying to analyze and trace what kind of campaign rhetorics the two major candidates are making or something like that. But basically, as I mentioned, the Korean experts think that the overall relationship between the South Korea and the United States would be all right, regardless of the outcome of the upcoming presidential election in November.
And you did touch on the election, and here in the U.S., at least we're still 45 days away from the election on November 5th. So can you give us a little bit of insight into how Koreans are feeling about a potential Trump presidency?
Well, again, basically, I think the RPA, the U.S. alliance would be durable, and for the South Korea-U.S. relations would be good under the second Trump presidency if Trump gets reelected in November. It's mainly because President Trump will also agree that South Korea is a useful ally or partner in terms of tracking the rise of China, which would be the #1 foreign policy priority of the second Trump government, and securing U.S. Economic interest in the region. But if we go a little bit deeper in the relationships, it is likely that the second Trump government will be aggressive in its relationship with South Korea based on, again, its transactional approach and America First trade policy. Now, specifically President Trump's transactional approach with its allies will come up with his political rhetoric on the economic aspects of the alliance operation, such as burden sharing, joint military exercises, and the deployment of the strategic assets to the Korean Peninsula. Meanwhile, the trade policy of the Trump government will be centered on reducing U.S. trade deficits, and will mainly use the tariffs, such as Universal Baseline Tariffs and the Trump Reciprocal Trade Act. It means that the tariff man will come back next year. And there will be no distinction between allies and non-allies in President Trump's political efforts to reduce the trade deficit, and therefore it is likely that trade barriers on South Korea's exports to the United States will get higher. So if Trump gets reelected, South Korea needed to find amicable solutions to manage its security and trade interests with the United States.
Personally, I hope that we don't get too many tariffs on on South Korean products. I mean, you're a top 10 trading partner for us, and I think you're the #2 trading partner for the United States. And personally, I drive a Kia Telluride, great car, love it. My next car is probably going to be Korean, and my TV is LG, so I'd like my TV to be good and quite reasonably cheap. I think it's probably some of the best TVs out there. I do think that Trump historically, his bark is worse than his bite, and if the South Korean government is smart and plays nice with him and talks about joint ventures, that you might be able to shift his attention elsewhere in terms of trade. But you're absolutely right in that he is very transactional, and sometimes when you're dealing with allies and someone as close to us and as durable as Korea, that maybe you should be a little less transactional.
I'm sorry, and
Professor,
could you a little bit speak loudly for me, please? What was the question?
Absolutely. Sorry, that was a comment, but the question is, would it be fair to say that the Korean people, the Korean government might feel a little bit more comfortable with a Harris administration because it'll be seen as a continuation of the Biden administration?
Yes, I think so. As you mentioned, the many experts in South Korea think that the Harris government is likely to hand down the Biden government's policy orientations. And as you know, the 2024 Democratic Party platform was written before President Biden dropped out of the race, and it didn't reflect the situation where Vice President Harris would replace the presidential candidate. And the situation shows that the platform did not change even if its presidential candidate changed. and it also indicates that Harris would succeed Biden's policy orientations. So the Harris government is likely to accomplish the major policies of the Biden-Harris era instead of pursuing its own new policies. So likewise, the Harrison government's policy toward the Korean Peninsula is likely to maintain the Biden government's policy on the peninsula. So the Harris government is expected to strengthen the ROK-US alliance and deepen its cooperation with South Korea across a range of areas to track the rise of China and maintain its leadership in the region. So the level and scope of the ROK-US alliance are likely to expand beyond the Korean Peninsula, and the alliance is expected to play a more active role in the Indo-Pacific. So under the Harris government, South Korea would get the higher stability and predictability compared to the second Trump government.
And Professor, building on what you just said, what would be some concerns, some potential worries about a potential Harris presidency?
Well, of course, the South Korean government could have the stability and predictability under the Harris government, but South Korean government will need to take care of its relations with China under the Harris government, because under the Harris government, U.S. will ask South Korea for playing a more active role in the Pacific region, which means that South Korea could need to have a louder voice in terms of tracking the rise of China. So for example, if the United States has got some kind of the disputes with China across the Taiwan the Strait or the South China Sea, and then the U.S. may ask its regional allies like Japan and South Korea and Australia to work together with the United States in terms of containing China or something like that. And it may ask the South Korea to speak more loudly in terms of the containing China or the other blaming China, criticizing China in terms of the China's aggressive behavior in the region. Then South Korea would have some kind of embarrassing situations because China is still important trade partner for South Korea, and China is also an important political player in terms of dealing with the North Korean issues. So under the Harris government, South Korean government and South Korea could have the better illustrations in terms of securing stability and predictability, but it also has the task to take care of its relations with China.
Professor, on the subject of China, Americans watch China very closely. It's one topic that both parties the only topic that both parties seem to agree on is that China is our primary competitor and not a friendly one. But sometimes I think Americans don't really have the best sense of what's actually going on, and we're legendary for a country that only 30% of the people have passports. From your point of view in Korea, how do you see China's so this is a two-part question. How do you see China's aggressiveness in the Asian area? Do you think that there is a real risk of a problem in the Taiwan Strait or an invasion of Taiwan? Is that a distant risk, or is that a real risk? And then the second part of the question is, how is the Chinese economy really doing? Because we always try to figure out, can we trust the statistics? Can we trust the reporting? But you're much closer than we are. Can you give us an idea on those two points?
Okay. First, regarding your question about the correct perception about China and the region, basically the many experts in South Korea don't think that China is immediate security threat to South Korea and other regional countries. Um, of course, the South Korea or the expert in South Korea feels that China will be the security threat in the long term, but immediately, China is not that serious security concern for South Korea. Meanwhile, South Korea need to take care of its relationship to China because economically, China is still important for South Korean economy. So we can see a little bit the gap between the South Korea and the U.S. or Japan in terms of how these countries perceive China in terms of a security threat. So a little bit difference, and we can see such kind of difference between U.S. and Japan and ASEAN countries in the region. And for your the second question of so the, how the I'm sorry, but what was the second question? I'm sorry.
It's really from your point of view, because you're much closer than we are. How is the Chinese economy really doing? Because sometimes it's hard to trust the statistics that come out that are government released. Are they okay? Are they really struggling? Is there anything that you've seen from your point of view that it would be great for Americans to know?
All right, thank you for for the question. I think that China's economy is getting better, although it had really the hard time in terms of its domestic problems like the high unemployment rates and some kind of the bad economic situations in terms of the many the economic sectors in China. But I think that China's economy is getting better, and um, probably it'll take some time before China will fully recover its economic capabilities. But it'll take about 3 or 5 years before the China fully recovers its economy. So, of course, it will not easy for the Chinese government to fully resolve the domestic problems that it has got. But the China is a big country, and I think that it tries to resolve the problem. So I think that China will just stand up again as the original hegemon or the original economic power in the coming years.
And building on what you just said, Professor, as well as what you mentioned, Tai, because sometimes when we're hearing about economic data, it does get mixed with the politics, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Especially when we're talking about diplomacy. So, one thing that I sometimes like doing is reading websites, looking at news as it's reported from overseas. So whether we're talking about Western European, Canadian, or even other Asian language websites to see how they're reporting on, say, the GDP figures or the statistics coming out from China, because we know even here in the US when we're looking at data releases, if we're reading an article, a website article about that, there's always this analysis that comes into it.
Right. And it's good that you brought that up, because one of my favorite newspapers overseas is the Straits Times in Singapore, and they really kind of play it straight. And you want to sometimes get away from the sort of the American focused news coverage, because it is biased, and sometimes you have to read it with a certain lens, and that's why it's so valuable to have someone who's really in Asia talk to us about Asia. There's nothing like what they call the feet on the ground.
Yes.
It really makes a big difference.
Yeah, and speaking of which, Tai, I do want to ask the professor to help us understand, especially for American viewers out there, to help us understand this historical relationship of the U.S. and Korea between different political parties. So can you walk us through this, Professor? And does Korea favor one American party over another? What does this mean when we take a bird's eye view of what's been happening?
Well, personally, I don't think that South Korea favors one American political party over another, like the Democrats over Republicans or Republicans over Democrats. It's mainly because the two American political parties have got little difference in terms of their policies toward the Korean Peninsula. Over decades, more specifically since the Korean War, America has been the most important ally or friend to South Korea. Without the support from the United States, it was impossible for South Korea to maintain peace against North Korea and achieve economic prosperity. And during the modernization process, the two American political parties showed a bipartisan consensus in terms of protecting and supporting South Korea. So Korean people truly appreciate the United States for helping South Korea consistently, and the Korean people don't favor one American political party over the other, although the individuals could have some kind of preference about the one American political party over the other, but it's just the personal the appetite. So therefore, the South Korean government will respect the outcome of the upcoming U.S. president election in November, and it is ready to gladly work with the next U.S. government. Period.
I think that's just such a healthy attitude. I wish Americans had, as healthy an attitude with, Korea. It's like, you're our ally, whoever it is, you will be our ally, and it's been a great partnership, and probably one of the really good things that Americans are often wrong on American policy can sometimes be poor, but what's our relationship with Korea and what we've done to help Korea, the miracle on the Han River, is one of the really good things that we've done, and I really do think it will be a durable alliance, and I think that will also continue. But I just want to go back to China for a minute, if you don't mind. Because you're there and you've done a lot of work on China, do you have a sense? Can you give us an idea? What does China, the politicians and the people, actually think about the United States? I mean, there's the rhetoric. Sometimes it's diplomacy. What do you think China actually thinks about us?
Well,
is it just a crazy American politics? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't think so. But as you know, nowadays the U.S.-China strategic competition has been intensified, and nowadays I think that the most U.S. people think that China is their number one competitor or adversary, and the Chinese people recognize that kind of the U.S. people's perception about them. So the Chinese people they think that the U.S. is too aggressive in terms of the containing China without any acceptable reasons, and they want their government to stand up against the U.S. So I think that as long as the U.S. is pushing hard China in terms of its competition, then the Chinese people's perception about the United States would remain at their worst, at the bottom for some times. So it depends on how the two countries interact each other in terms of the maintaining their competitions in various fields. So, but I want to point out that the Chinese people should be the responsible, not move first, because the Chinese people know that the U.S. is stronger than China, so the China should react uh, with what the United States would do against their country. So it depends on how U.S. feel, what the U.S. people feel toward China and the Chinese people, and then following that kind of perceptions, Chinese people will respond to those kind of perceptions accordingly. So it depends on the United States. Chinese people don't hate America. Instead, they envy the U.S. and the U.S. people. But they also have some kind of the pride and the patriotism. So they want to be respected by the, the most of the powerful country and the Asian people.
And speaking of perception and American people, some Americans naturally may have a hawkish view about foreign policy, including U.S.-Korea relations. So in your opinion, Professor, why is it in the U.S.'s best interest to maintain supportive relations between the two countries?
Well, as I mentioned earlier today, the enhancing cooperation with South Korea is also working for the U.S. strategic and national interests. Again, the U.S. has prioritized the strategic competition with China, and it needs allies and partners to work together in order to achieve the strategic goal. And the U.S. has got fierce competition with China in advanced technologies like semiconductors, large volume batteries, and bioindustries. And to track the rise of China in those fields, the Biden government is reshaping the supply chains and enhancing unilateral or multilateral cooperation with its key allies and partners in the region. And the South Korea is absolutely one of the key allies of the United States in high-tech industries because South Korea, as you know, has got world-class manufacturing capabilities in advanced technologies and strategic industries. And in addition, South Korea has got a well-organized military, and its weapon systems are highly interoperable with the U.S. weapon systems. So South Korea is also a pretty good military partner for U.S. in order to prepare for tracking the rise of China in military and security areas. So taken together, strengthening ROK-US alliance and enhancing its cooperation with South Korea is just working for the U.S. strategic and national interests. So as long as U.S. maintains its strategic competition with China, South Korea will remain as a reliable and useful partner to the United States. And the same situation for South Korea to the United States.
Professor, I think you're absolutely right. And it brings us to a topic that, a contentious topic, and I think you've done a lot of work on this. What is the role of the significance of North Korea in sort of U.S.-China and U.S.-South Korea relations? I mean, it seems to us that it really doesn't make sense for China to support North Korea. It certainly probably is not profitable. So why does China support North Korea, and how do you see North Korea's role in the U.S.-South Korea relationship?
Well, basically, I think that since the Korean War in the 1950s, North Korea has been functioned as a buffer zone for China against the United States and its regional allies like South Korea and Japan. It is true that supporting North Korea is not economically profitable for China, and nowadays China is reluctant to actively supporting North Korea because it needed to consider its relations with the United States, and it also want to positively maintain its international standing in the global community. But China also perceives that North Korea is strategically important. China wants to keep North Korea as a buffer zone, and its competition with the U.S. has been intensified. Think about the situation where the U.S. troops would just station right in front of the borderline with China if North Korea is gone. So it would be the nightmare for the Chinese government. And in addition, North Korea has been a useful region or ground that China has been actively or directly involved in the issues on the Korean Peninsula. And North Korea has been fully aware of the strategic considerations that China has got about Pyongyang. So it has taken advantage of the situation and it could survive with the help of China against the economic sanctions of the international community. So North Korea is very wise in terms of taking advantage of the Chinese strategic considerations and the environmental situations.
Well, Professor, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday evening. We know that you're several hours ahead of us here in the U.S., so we really appreciate all of your insights and helping us understand what's happening from on the ground in South Korea today.
Thank you so much, Professor. It was really great listening to you.
Thank you so much, and have a great weekend. And before we go, we'll take a quick look at the markets. Right now, we are seeing the Dow, Nasdaq, and S&P 500 lower on the session. We are seeing the Dow off by 0.16%, and the Nasdaq Composite Index is also lower on the session as well, off by 0.4%. The S&P 500 is off by minus 0.3%. Keep in mind that yesterday we saw a record high for the S&P 500 as well as the Dow. And Tai, thank you so much for joining me today. And this week we had a lot to go through, so I appreciate all of your time and your insights as well.
It's been fun.
Thank you so much. And that will do it for Global Money Talk live from the New York Stock Exchange. We're so excited to bring you daily coverage here on SunPro TV. You can check out the show anytime on our YouTube channel by searching Global Money Talk. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful weekend.